Alright, this is the time and place for a public hearing on the application submitted by Delaware City Refining Company to restart Unit 34, the Olefins plant, which has been out of service since May 2001. The restart projects a 35 BTU per hour existing heater. Will be restarted, and 3 product storage tanks and a feed served drum will be used. And, this would be a permit under what regulation?
It's under Delaware Code Regulation 1102.
1102. It used to be called Reg 2.
It used to be called Reg 2.
Used to be called Reg 2. Good
They
old days.
recodified.
All right. My name is Robert Haynes. I've been assigned to preside over this public hearing and prepare a report of recommendations for the Secretary of the Department, Colin O'Mara, who will be making the final decision. This public hearing is to receive public comments on the application, and there is no draft permit.
There's no draft permit, sir.
And Mr. Foster, who will introduce himself shortly, or Mr. Rangan, who will be speaking. Who will be speaking?
Oh, the bus.
If there's questions, we're here. It's
All right.
really a presentation by the refinery and their application.
All right.
There's a hearing on the app.
Anyway, they will be preparing a permit should the Secretary decide that a permit should be issued. A couple of housekeeping matters. Please, if you have an electronic device, please put it on silent. And if you do receive a phone call, please exit the hearing room before speaking. The court reporter to my right will be transcribing the public comments for the record. And there's a sign-in sheet to the extent you'd like to speak. I'd like you to indicate whether you want to speak. And on that, although I don't think we'll have any time constraints tonight. With that, I'll turn it to, I believe the applicant has a presentation and is ready to go with it. Why don't you introduce yourselves and I'll have the department representative. Why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Paul Foster. I'm the program manager of the Engineering Compliance Branch. We write the permits and do the inspections for our air quality in the state of Delaware. I would be signing the permit.
I'm Ravi Rangan. I'm an engineer with the Engineering and Compliance Branch, Division of Air Quality. My primary responsibility is oversight of the Delaware City Refinery for permitting and compliance. And I will be representing the department with the exhibits and the department's questions on this permit application.
And, why don't we do the exhibits now? We'll do the
Okay. We have, excuse me, we have 5 exhibits. Exhibit 1 is permit application and cover letter, both dated October 22nd, 2012, with attachment signed by Herman Seedorf, refinery manager, and addressed to Ali Mirzakhalidi, director, Division of Air Quality. Exhibit number 2 is a copy of email dated December 3rd, 2012, from Amy Rowe, Conservation Chair, Delaware Chapter of the Sierra Club, addressed to Secretary Colin O'Mara, requesting a public hearing for DCRC's permit application. Exhibit 3 is a copy of an email notification dated January 15th, 2013 to Amy Rowe from Penny Gentry about tonight's hearing. Exhibit 4 are copies of legal notices dated November 18th, 2012, and affidavits of publication of DAQ's receipt of DCRC's application as they appeared in the News Journal and the Delaware State News. And finally, exhibit number 5 are copies of legal notices dated December 16th, 2012, and affidavits of publication of DAQ's intent to hold tonight's hearing. That concludes the list of our exhibits.
And these exhibits were prepared just to assist the public in the public comments. The department reserves the right to develop the record to support the Secretary's final decision. With that, I'll turn it over to representatives of the applicant.
Hi, my name is Tom Gillespie. I'm an environmental engineer on staff at Delaware City Refinery. My primary area of responsibility includes air permitting and other permitting for the refinery.
Bob Newchan, the environmental supervisor at the refinery, and I'm here with Tom tonight in the presentation of our intention to reactivate the Olefins plant.
You guys want to introduce yourself?
Andy Warner, I work for Environmental Resources Management, ERM. We're an environmental consulting company that supports the refinery and dealing with the air permit application.
I am Colin McGrory. I also work for the ERM, supporting the refinery.
So once the applicant makes his presentation, I'll then take public comments based on the people who signed in to make public comments. With the exception of Ms. Roach, as she requested the public hearing, I'll let her go first.
Okay, we have just a short presentation that goes over the basics of the project, major pieces of equipment and sources of emissions.
Sign that sheet first.
First, by way of project background and objectives, as mentioned previously by the hearing officer, the Olefins Unit has been out of service since 2001. However, the unit has been maintained in the refinery's emission inventory and in our Title V operating permit. The unit takes basically a polymerized gasoline stream that currently is sent into the DCR gasoline pool and takes out of that stream olefins products for sale. The remainder of the mixed gasoline stream is then returned back to gasoline blending. So it's a pretty simple unit. As far as the olefins unit itself, the major pieces of equipment, there are 4 distillation columns that are needed to separate the olefins from the remainder of the gasoline stream. Those columns do not have any direct emissions to the atmosphere. There is 1 process heater that provides heat to the whole unit, and that is process heater 134H101, which are having burners replaced as part of this project. There are 3 product storage tanks. These are tanks that were formerly in methanol service at the refinery and are being reconditioned and returned to service in olefin service. There is a feed surge drum that is also being repurposed from another idle unit at the refinery, the ether plant. The feed surge drum is a closed pressurized tank that also has no emissions, so when we don't touch on that later, you know why. There is a loading rack that we can use to load products, trucks and rail cars, that was formerly in methanol service that is being returned to service for use in the olefins project. And of course, there are new piping that is needed to interconnect the unit and the tanks and loading racks that were not previously in olefin service. The heater 134H101 is a 35 million BTU an hour heater that will fire refinery fuel gas. Just on the scale of things, it's a relatively small heater. We have heaters at the refinery that range from very small up to 400 million BTUs an hour, so this is about a tenth of the size of the bigger ones that we have. NOx emissions from the heater will be 0.060 pounds per million BTU based on burner manufacturer specifications. Sulfur dioxide emissions are conservatively estimated based on the maximum expected sulfur content in refinery fuel gas. PM, carbon monoxide, and volatile organic compounds are based on the manufacturer specifications, the burner manufacturer specifications that is, and other emissions are estimated using EPA factors. We have 3 product storage tanks that are in use in the unit, will be in use in the unit. They are 1,500 barrels per day each throughput anticipated, which is also probably conservative. I don't think that's about the rate that we expect to produce from the unit, so we're assuming that throughput could go through either one of the 3 tanks, so it's a conservative emission estimation. We perform the emission calculations using EPA tanks program, which is a mandated program for use in calculating emissions from tanks. Tank 580 is an external floating roof tank, which basically floats on the level of the liquid to minimize emissions from filling the tank up. Tanks 582 and 583 are internal floating roof tanks, which means it has a floating roof and a fixed lid on top. As part of the project, we'll be installing double bottoms in all 3 of the tanks to bring them up to the current leak prevention standards found in the Delaware above ground storage tank regulations. As we mentioned before, we need a loading rack to get products into transport. We're repurposing a loading rack that was formerly used at the refinery methanol plant, and vapors from loading of product will be captured and controlled to another process heater in the refinery for heat recovery and combustion. The treatment of those vapors is estimated to be greater than 98%. Those vapors are inherently low in sulfur due to the product specifications for the olefins. The only other source of emissions, the unit has piping and components that could potentially leak. There are approximately 2,500 components in the entire unit. Those components will be incorporated into the refinery's leak detection and repair program. There's a summary of I'm not going to read all the numbers off to you, of the overall project-related emissions for nitrous oxides, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, particulate matter, sulfuric acid mist, lead, and greenhouse gas equivalent, CO2 equivalent. Sulfuric acid. These are the
The rest of what you just listed, I didn't do it all.
You said mist.
mist, sulfuric acid mist, lead, and greenhouse gas equivalents, carbon dioxide equivalents. These are the criteria pollutants that we're required to evaluate as part of the project. All of those emission levels are well below significance thresholds for new source review. Most of them are several times below the significant threshold, so there's really nothing else required to be done for the project. As we mentioned, proposed permit terms, the olefins unit itself and the heater is already included in the Title V permit, so we're not proposing anything different by way of permit conditions. We're proposing to just reactivate the heaters and the tanks, which again are in the permit. And we're seeking authorization to do the piping installations that we need to interconnect the tanks and the loading rack. And also, our proposed permit condition is to require the use of 42H123, which is a process heater at the refinery to control VOC emissions from product loading. There is a regulatory requirement for heaters that we have to demonstrate that this is a low sulfur stream, so we have testing that we have to do that will be conducted in the first 30 days of operation and submitted to EPA for approval. And that's a little picture of our 4 distillation columns. That's the conclusion of our short presentation.